You know, Tulsi Gabbard is getting into the presidential race, and of course there's been some, you could say, criticism or controversy on aspects of her record that has come to light and people have started paying attention to. Of all of these things that people are going to hit her on, there's one thing that's coming up that I fundamentally disagree as a black mark, and it has to do with her going to Syria and ending up meeting Assad. Of all the things on Tulsi Gabbard's record that people may poke at or may prod or may say something about that's critical, if we're talking about from the standpoint of the left, I would say that her going to Syria and talking to Assad was not a negative, that wasn't a blemish, that was a bright spot. That's a plus. That is a feather in her cap, especially from the standpoint of the left. I mean, at the end of the day, we looked at what was taking place in Syria and looked at it as we don't necessarily have standing to do what we've been doing in Syria. And fact of the matter is, if the goal is to end the conflict, not talking to him and taking this position that the person has to leave, which is what the Obama administration has taken on, and of course the Republican Party is going to be more hawkish, is not the way to stop it. Not to mention there was a certain degree of dishonesty that was going on with the conversation in Syria in the standpoint of the mainstream media. Tulsi cut through that, going roughshod against her party in order to make the point that, you know, this is the path that you need to go to if you're looking for any level of peace in Syria, saying that he's the person who's in charge. I guess the point is, I want to make this point that that is not a blemish. That is a bright spot. George Bush, President of the United States, invaded Iraq. And in invading Iraq, he did so with cherry-picked, quote-unquote, evidence and with a lot of theater, but essentially goes into Iraq saying that somehow, in some way, there's a link between Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden, and that we are going into Iraq because there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. This, at this point, is utterly ridiculous, and even back then there were some people that were saying this was ludicrous, but George Bush goes in and he's looking, and they're looking for these weapons, and these weapons don't exist. 1 million people have been, you could say, vanquished from the face of the earth just because the President of the United States decided he wanted to invade another country. This 1 million people is bad enough, but this has led to a chain of events where we have been in those countries in the Middle East now for like, what, 17 years or something? Going into one country after the next. After we destroyed Iraq, destroyed Afghanistan, we go into Libya and completely obliterate Libya. You can buy your own black slave in Libya for the cost of a Buick or something. And going into Syria. Now, the Syria thing becomes somewhat of a complicated thing because this started off as, you could say, riots or civil unrest, in which case we started to feud jihadis, and you have all sorts of governments that we're aligned with, Western nations and some nations of the Middle East, sending weapons and munitions to the terrorists in Syria in order to destabilize that country, in order to depose with a coup Bashar al-Assad. If it was not for Russia and Iran propping up the government, that government would have collapsed, and it would have probably looked like Libya with roving gangs and complete civil unrest, complete chaos. Tulsi Gabbard goes on a secret mission to see for herself what was going on in Syria because she didn't believe the mainstream media narrative. Seeing this mainstream media was following the same narrative that he did when he was talking about Libya and some of these other cases. Either ignores the U.S. presence in those areas or talks about it in a way that shows that our U.S. presence is good, our U.S. presence is right, and we're doing God's work because we, by definition, are the United States. Tulsi goes, her and Dennis Kucinich, and looks into it themselves. This pisses off mainstream media, because Tulsi Gabbard is not accepting mainstream media's narrative of events, and she's bucking the narrative that they are putting forth. This turns into somewhat of an explosive thing because Tulsi Gabbard is looking for the reality of events, whereas the mainstream media was pushing a regime change narrative. It was almost unanimous at this point. Listen to this argument that she has with Jake Tapper. I've shown this video before, but I kind of want to make this point of why this isn't a negative on her record. This is a plus.
Of Hawaii, she just returned from a secret trip to Syria. Congresswoman Gabbard, thanks for coming and sharing your story with us.
Aloha, Jake. Good to be with you.
So you were in Syria for 4 days. Did you meet with President Bashar al-Assad?
I did. You know, my reason for going to visit Syria was really because of the suffering of the Syrian people that has been weighing heavily on my heart. I wanted to see if there was, in some small way, a way that I could express the love and the aloha and the care that the American people have for the people of Syria, and to see firsthand what was happening there, to see that situation there.
What did Assad have to say?
Initially, I hadn't planned on meeting him. When the opportunity arose to meet with him, I did so because I felt it's important that if we profess to truly care about the Syrian people, about their suffering, then we've got to be able to meet with anyone that we need to if there is a possibility that we could achieve peace. And that's exactly what we talked about.
No, I know.
Bashar al-Assad is a leader of that country, whether we like it or not. Any peace deal that takes place would have to include Bashar al-Assad. Meaning, if you're trying to get anything done, it makes all the sense in the world that that's the person who you have to meet to get it done, seeing he's the head of the country. The United States wanted him to leave. They were trying to depose him in somewhat of a coup. It is not the United States' job to attack countries that in no way has attacked us. And fact of the matter is, taking the behaviors that we've taken in this regard were illegal. Let her get to the point in this.
Know the maxim that people say in the military, that you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies. But obviously Bashar al-Assad is responsible for thousands of deaths and millions of people being displaced during this 5-year-long civil war. Did you have any compunctions about meeting with somebody like that, giving him any sort of enhanced credibility because a member of the United States Congress would meet with someone?
This right here, this is getting off the point. This scene is aggravating the shit out of me. There's no issue with meeting with the Saudis. Zero. We've worked with dictators all across the world, putting dictators in those positions all across the world. The documents from the CIA by itself. I don't understand how Jake Tapper, and I would imagine that Jake Tapper has seen information based on CIA activities around the globe. Meaning Jake Tapper would know that the United States has been responsible for putting in dictators, bloody, vicious dictators in the various countries in South America and Southeast Asia. We've had contact with these guys. So he's acting as if, you know, you have no compunction with meeting with, you know, this guy who killed thousands. I hate to tell Jake Tapper, but George Bush has been responsible for the deaths of over 1 million people. Obama has been responsible for the deaths of thousands with this drone warfare where he's been murdering civilians en masse. Donald Trump has been responsible for the deaths of thousands at this point en masse with these black operations. I don't understand how there's this massive disparity in the perceptions of somebody like Bashar al-Assad, who, yes, has killed thousands of people in a war, as opposed to the President of the United States, who has also done similar grisly things, and we are not even, supposedly, at war. One, he's okay with, the other, he's not. I'm not saying that these are the exact same people. I'm saying that their ability of this kind of cognitive dissonance of what people in our country do in power and what they advocate for, as opposed to the grisly things that other people do in other countries. This is somewhat of a nonsense hit point, but they always try to hit her with us. Let's keep going.
Like that.
Whatever you think about President Assad, the fact is that he is the president of Syria. In order for any peace agreement, in order for any possibility of a viable peace agreement to occur, there has to be a conversation with him. The Syrian people will determine his outcome and what happens with their government and their future. But our focus, my commitment is on ending this war that has caused so much suffering to these Syrian people, to these children, to these families, many of whom I met on this trip. It's important for us to stay focused on doing what is in their best interest and what is in our best interest, and doing what it is necessary to make that happen.
So, Congressman Adam Kinzinger, a friend of yours, also a military veteran, a Republican, he said on Twitter when he heard about your visit, quote, "Fact-finding mission, fact, 50,000 plus dead children in Syria. Tulsi Gabbard, I hope you didn't meet with their butcher, Assad." Now, Assad has used chemical weapons on his own people. You said...
Jake Tapper has just done something slimy there. He's introduced a comment by somebody saying, hey, this person's in the military also, just because we want to have a parody. And this person said you met with a brutal dictator that's killed 50,000 kids. And then he moves on. He never lets her respond to this. He just moves on. Meaning Jake Tapper has a certain perspective, and he's introducing information that he doesn't let the person who's there respond to. I'm just saying that's kind of slimy. But her rejoinder to this is why I'm showing this video, and is the thing that nails it to me. And Jake Tapper turns into a stammering idiot afterwards.
That it's going to be up to the Syrian people, but there really aren't free and fair elections in Syria.
I'll tell you what I heard from the Syrian people that I met with, Jake, walking down the streets in Aleppo, in Damascus, hearing from them. They expressed happiness and joy.
By the way, whether they're free and fair elections or not is besides the point. It is not our responsibility to dictate the government that they have in Syria. If the people in Syria want to change that, they change that. It is not for us to impose our will on that. What Jake Tapper said there is moot. It doesn't matter. Let's keep going.
At seeing an American walking through their streets, but they expressed a question. They said, why is it that the United States, its allies and other countries are providing support, are providing arms to terrorist groups like al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, Arar al-Sham, ISIS, who are on the ground there raping, kidnapping, torturing, and killing the Syrian people, children, men, women, people of all ages. They asked me, why is the United States and its allies supporting these terrorist groups who are destroying Syria when it was al-Qaeda who attacked the United States on 9/11, not Syria? I didn't have an answer for them.
Obviously, the United States government denies providing any sort of help to the terrorist groups that you're talking about. They say they provide.
Jake Tapper can't even get it out. Fact of the matter is, what Tulsi Gabbard just said there is true. We've been supporting and giving weapons and munitions to terrorist groups. And not just us, our allies, meaning Israel was out there supporting terrorist groups in order to create a buffer zone between itself and Syria because they've been illegally holding on to the Golan Heights. We have been doing bad things. Whatever you want to do and make that comment, make that argument of why the United States should be supporting terrorists in any country, let alone in a country that hadn't attacked us. Understand what that means. They try to keep making this argument as if everybody that Bashar al-Assad is fighting is in a civil war, missing the point intentionally that many of the people who are in that country at this point who are fighting these wars were getting funding from us. We're getting funding from us because we wanted to destabilize Syria in the same way we wanted to destabilize Libya, in the same way we destroyed Iraq and Afghanistan, making it far easier to get your hands on resources in that region of the globe, but with a government not stable enough to stop you from doing so. Whatever you want to think from the standpoint of geopolitical politics, meaning if you're one of these people who say, yes, we can play that geopolitical game, or we can, this geopolitical chess match. There is a reality underlying this of U.S. troops that are being put in these places to be essentially the boot of America, and the reality of the people who are dying at our hands. Even the reality of the immigration crisis that essentially hit Europe, with people fleeing the war zones that we created. To some degree, you could say it's a karmic justice from the standpoint of Europe, that Europe stood by and assisted in our actions in those other regions of the globe. This kind of karmic debt coming home and mass thing with a certain amount of civil unrest within Europe as a result of it. But there's reality to this. When she talks about this thing that it is now not our responsibility to be policemen of the world, she's right. When she makes this question of, yes, if you want to have peace in that region of the globe and stop having those people being killed and so forth, one of the main things you need to do is stop supporting terrorists in that region of the globe. She is right. The foreign policy that we've been enacting, essentially using proxies in order to fight these wars, or using the CIA to fight these wars, she's right. That stuff needs to stop. We've been doing bad things, and there have been people who've been dying and taking the brunt of us doing those bad things. People are shocked to shit that people, there's unrest in the Middle East, that it's on fire. It's not on fire because people are just that way. It's on fire because of what we've been doing. And it is time to reevaluate our foreign policy. If the foreign policy is moved to a certain thing of, let's stop setting places on fire. Tulsi Gabbard was right here. This was not a negative. This wasn't a besmirching of a record. We spend nearly $1 trillion on military being policemen of the world. And not just that, the casualties are tremendous. You can buy your own black slave in Libya. She's right. Whatever you want to think of Tulsi, this was not a black mark on a record. This was a plus. So I'll leave this here. I don't want to keep this one long because I have other videos that I want to do. So yeah, I'll leave this here. I'll see you guys momentarily. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks all. I'll see you shortly.